Ebola protocol. Political leaders clash with medical experts over protecting the U.S. from Ebola. Rising toll. The death of a 14-year-old girl raises the Washington State high school shooting death toll to 3. Teens taken. Boko Haram kidnaps more teens in Nigeria as a new report on the terror group is released. Pope Emeritus honored. Unveiling a bust of Benedict, Pope Francis praises his predecessor's devotion to the church. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Monday, October 27th, 2014. Good evening from Washington. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. Stopping the spread of Ebola may be the most pressing problem facing the world today. The White House says it must start in West Africa, where the deadly virus is concentrated. As Wyatt Goolsby reports, the administration says it's a matter of national security and the safety of Americans. Wyatt?
Brian, once again today, White House officials are stressing the need for the U.S. to step up and to support healthcare workers in West Africa. But despite President Obama's appointing an Ebola czar to oversee and to coordinate U.S. response, some state politicians are taking matters into their own hands.
As we've said many, many times, the likelihood of a widespread outbreak in this country of Ebola is exceedingly low. But the only way that we can entirely eliminate that risk is to stop this Ebola outbreak in its tracks in West Africa.
No matter your politics, it's hard to disagree with the idea of stopping Ebola where it came from, West Africa. But how should states make sure the outbreak doesn't spread? This weekend, New Jersey Governor Chris Christie didn't apologize for imposing a 21-day quarantine on all workers who made direct contact with Ebola patients. But today, Casey Hickox, a nurse who volunteered in Africa, was sent home to Maine after spending her weekend in a tent outside a New Jersey hospital. She says the fever she had is unrelated to Ebola. The White House has not criticized governors from New York, Illinois, and Maryland for announcing similar quarantine plans. Instead, it will work with the states to make sure anyone coming home will be treated with dignity and respect. Experts here in D.C. are discussing the best tactics to contain the virus. Dr. Tara O'Toole, a former Homeland Security official, says widespread quarantines will not be effective in the long run.
If you think it through, it's an action that is going to be very hard to sustain. This epidemic is going to go on for a long while in Africa.
Dr. Robert Kadlec is an expert in tropical medicine and hygiene. He says one of the best things the U.S. can do right now is make sure countries in West Africa have the resources they need.
Simple things like latex gloves, gowns, and those kinds of things are central to this response, particularly in lieu of having a vaccine or therapeutic.
We've also learned a 5-year-old boy who recently visited West Africa and has a fever is being treated for the virus in New York right now. The World Health Organization estimates that roughly 10,000 people have been infected with Ebola since March, and nearly half of those have died. Brian?
All right, Wyatt Goolsby at the White House. Thank you. U.S. healthcare workers are now joined by American soldiers and being monitored for Ebola. 11 members of the Army are isolated on a base in Italy after returning from Liberia. Major General Darrell Williams, the commander leading the U.S. response in Liberia, will be monitored along with his staff for 21 days. Pentagon officials say the soldiers are not under quarantine, but rather controlled monitoring. Several dozen more are returning in the next few days and will also be isolated. So far, though, no military members are showing symptoms of Ebola. Now some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. The man who scaled the White House fence last week is being ordered to undergo psychiatric evaluation and treatment for the next 45 days. 23-year-old Dominic Adesanya appeared in court today. He screamed for help as marshals forcibly removed him from the courtroom after a judge found him incompetent to stand trial. He is charged with 2 federal offenses: unlawfully entering restricted grounds and harming 2 law enforcement dogs. A 3rd student has died after a shooting Friday at a high school just north of Seattle, Washington. The 14-year-old girl, Gia Soriano, died Sunday night. A 15-year-old student died earlier. Another 15-year-old student killed himself after opening fire in the school's cafeteria on Friday. 3 other students are still hospitalized, 2 in critical, 1 in satisfactory condition. Police still don't know the motive behind this latest school shooting. Police say the man who stormed Canada's Parliament building and killed a soldier left behind a video describing his ideology. The video by Michael Zihaf-Bobo hasn't been released yet. Investigators are still reviewing it for more clues to what the government calls a terror attack. Royal Canadian Mounted Police say the video message explains the suspect's motives and political outlook. Friends say Zihaf-Bobo converted to Islam and was radicalized. He killed a soldier at the War Memorial last week in Ottawa before storming the Parliament building. He was shot and killed by that chamber's sergeant-at-arms. Pope Francis sounded a warning about the state of the family this weekend.
La familia, el matrimonio, nunca fue tan atacado como ahora.
The Pope saying the family is under attack like never before. He said the new forms of unions being proposed are, quote, totally destructive and limit the greatness of the love of marriage, end quote. His comments came during a Vatican audience with more than 7,000 members of the Schoenstatt lay movement for its 100th anniversary. The group was founded in Germany to foster spiritual renewal in the church. And Pope Francis praises his retired predecessor, Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, as a great pope. A bronze bust of Benedict was unveiled at the Political Academy of Sciences today. Pope Francis highlighted Benedict's theological insights and his love for all people. Pope Francis often expresses deep affection and gratitude for the prayers and support of the Pope Emeritus. Francis later greeted academics from the Pontifical Academy of Sciences who are attending their meeting in Rome. Well, as Republicans try to pick up 6 seats to win control of the U.S. Senate, the race in Alaska has become the most expensive in that state's history. Catherine Elliott reports on some creative campaigning by both parties.
Gabe Degosiak makes his rounds as a whaling crew member, hunting fresh catch and hauling pieces home to cook later.
It's something that gives us, it's pretty much our identity, subsistence, and every native has their own, but as far as me, it's whaling.
It's a tiring job, but it's not his only one. Degosiak also works for the Alaska Democratic Party, campaigning for State Senator Mark Begich's re-election.
You spend a lot of time making sure people are registered to vote, making sure they understand the importance of this vote, and then making sure we have people all throughout the villages that are working for us.
Begich is counting on rural Alaskans in his bid against Republican candidate Dan Sullivan.
You've got to put your primary focus somewhere, and Begich put his into rural Alaska, which is where he thinks he can get significant gains, and Sullivan's work in the rail belt, where he thinks he can.
But Sullivan, the former Alaska Attorney General, isn't ignoring the remote corners of his state either.
We're traveling all throughout Southeast last few days. That's Wrangell, Ketchikan, Petersburg right now today, and we're heading up to Fairbanks and Barrow. So probably a couple thousand miles in between.
Back in rural Barrow, where lemonade costs almost $16, Degosiak says local issues like the high cost of living should motivate people to vote.
They should care about, the prices at the gas and the prices at the store.
The Whaler, part of a ground game unlike any other in the country. Catherine Elliott, EWTN News Nightly.
Midterms matter as we continue our EWTN News Nightly coverage of the upcoming election 2014. In just a little more than a week, we welcome back Marjorie Dannenfelser, president of the Susan B. Anthony list promoting pro-life candidates and policies. That Alaska Senate race is drawing some attention, not one we normally look at. Is that important to the pro-life cause, that particular race?
Oh, you bet. You bet. Every single race that's up right now where we could pick up a pro-life senator is tight. So we have to fight really hard for each one of them. Alaska's really important, North Carolina, Arkansas, Louisiana, Kansas, Colorado, all tight within the margin of error, almost all of them. And we need 6 to have a pro-life Senate, 6 pickups. So, and we're in very good shape, but a lot of work is still to be done in just 1 week.
In New Hampshire, though, both candidates support legal abortion. How would you guide voters in a situation like that?
You know, it's interesting. There are a handful of candidates that say I'm pro-choice, and then they turn around and they vote pro-life almost every single time. The candidate in West Virginia is that, and also Scott Brown is that same person. Self-described pro-choice, but then he has an 80% pro-life voting record. And I think the Catholic Church has taught us all well, and that is there are moments for prudential judgments. There are two potential people that could be in the U.S. Senate, and frankly, at this point, what we really need is a pro-life majority, and the only way we will have one is if we have a Republican majority. That doesn't mean that we think Republicans are the only good people. It just means that Mitch McConnell, who would be the head of the Republicans in the Senate, would allow a vote on things like our top priority, the pain-capable bill that would stop abortion at 20 weeks. We believe Scott Brown would vote for it, but more importantly, it would never even see the light of day unless Republicans have the majority.
Of course, McConnell is facing a challenge from Allison Grimes in Kentucky, who has kind of distanced herself from the president, which is rather interesting.
She has indeed, and she's also distanced herself from her own position on abortion, which most of the women and men running in red states or even purple states are doing. This whole war on women idea, the abortion center has dropped out of it. They're talking about a lot of other issues. They're seeing that really the late-term taxpayer-funded abortion is not an issue that they want to be labeled with because it hurts them.
So is the pro-life stance at this point a plus or a minus for a senatorial candidate?
Well, it depends. It is a plus in general because we're seeing candidates being a lot more, speaking not less, just better about the abortion issue. I think we've gone through a bruising election when some candidates didn't do so well. They're thinking a lot. We work with candidates all the time about thinking deeply what you think, communicating well, and frankly coalescing around something that pro-choice, pro-life alike generally accept the idea of a restriction on late-term abortion, women included, young people included.
You are one of the most pro-life people I know, at least one of the most outspoken, but you weren't always pro-life. The New Yorker recently profiled you. What caused you to change your mind?
Well, I think I'll only really know in heaven, but I will say it was certainly an intellectual journey, certainly an emotional journey, but there's no question that it was a deeply spiritual one. And I began to meet people like you, people who were watching this show. And I have to say that it wouldn't have happened without prayer. And I really profoundly thank all those people who prayed, all those people who modeled a good life. Something that I had never really even met a Catholic until I came to Washington, D.C. and then to Duke. And I don't really know, but I do know that I'm grateful, and I know that God has been in charge of my life and present all the way along.
Are you optimistic about a pro-life Senate?
I am. I'm very optimistic, but as I said, it's very, very close.
And it's important everybody vote.
And everybody vote, and everybody get to work from here on in. Not just vote, but get your friends to vote. And make sure that after that vote, those candidates are very clear on why they were elected and what one of the first things they must do, and that is take a pro-life vote on this pain-capable bill.
Hold them accountable. Marjorie Dannenfelser with the Susan B. Anthony list. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, coming up, a new report reveals what girls kidnapped by the Islamic terror group Boko Haram are going through. Right after the break. On Monday, October 27th, thanks for joining us on EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick. What happened to the schoolgirls kidnapped by Boko Haram terrorists? We're learning more tonight about their plight, as Jason Calvi reports.
Boko Haram kidnapped this young woman and more than 200 other girls from a school in Nigeria back in April. Human Rights Watch released a report today detailing the victims' experiences and says Boko Haram has kidnapped at least 500 women and girls from northern Nigeria since 2009.
In captivity, the girls and women endured forced labor, forced participation in military or quasi-military exercises, forced marriage, forced conversion, and many were raped.
Human Rights Watch interviewed 30 Boko Haram kidnap victims, including 12 that escaped after the April kidnapping. They say the girls were targeted for attending school or being Christian.
They said, since we've caught you, we are going to convert you to Islam.
The terrorist group says they aim to set up an Islamic state throughout Nigeria. Amy Pate researches terror groups, including Boko Haram.
And so they see everything brought from the West, including Christianity, including secular forms of education, as being inauthentic to their culture in that area.
On a recent research trip there, Pate says she heard concerns from locals that the group might have members in the Nigerian military. which may be a reason the abducted students remain captive.
If they don't trust each other, it's hard for them to go into Sambisa Forest and expose themselves to ambush to actively track Boko Haram.
10 days ago, a ceasefire was announced between the government and terror group. There was new hope the missing girls would be released, but there's been ongoing battles and more kidnapping since then, raising questions if there's really a deal.
Maybe some dissident of the main Boko Haram body could have done that to break the ceasefire.
But as the negotiations continue, many of the victims told the Human Rights Watch that the police didn't interview them to help identify the criminals or even the locations of the terrorist camps. The report also says the girls that did escape are in great need of services like counseling, which, Brian, they say they're not receiving.
Thanks, Jason. Emmanuel Ogebe is the Nigerian lawyer who survived Boko Haram. He now works for the Jubilee campaign. It helps victims of religious persecution. Are the findings of this report surprising to you?
Well, Ryan, not at all, because in my testimony to Congress in June, one of the things I said was that it was startling that myself and Congressman Smith got to interview some of these girls before the media or even the Nigerian law enforcement got to interview them. So we have been aware about the abductions. I've helped some of these girls escape in the past, and some of them were quoted in that report.
Could some of them actually provide useful intelligence about Boko Haram?
Well, that's a good question. It's something that, because we still work in the country with these girls, that we're leery about talking about, because I think it would actually make them more vulnerable. They're
still in danger.
They're still in danger.
So the ceasefire announced between Nigeria's government and Boko Haram didn't last long. It seems like neither really has a whole lot of to stand on there. It's very fractured, isn't it?
Well, I mean, when the government makes a pronouncement, whether it's the U.S. government or the Nigerian government, my theory is, I'd rather wait for the truth to come out in a video. I want to see the movie that the terrorists put out. Because unfortunately, Boko Haram is more credible because they are the ones who are critical to whether there's going to be ceasefire or not. A unilateral ceasefire is not helpful to the situation.
We've heard a lot about ISIS, the Islamic State, but Boko Haram has been actively doing its thing more behind the scenes. Is it becoming more organized, or is it falling apart?
Well, Boko Haram has been very organized. I can tell you this. One of the girls we rescued is told how they never use cell phones because they know that they can be tracked, and so they have the means of communicating that is beneath the radar. We should also recall this is even in the media that Boko Haram was taking aerial surveillance evasion techniques in northern Mali. We're talking about over a year and a half ago. So this is a very sophisticated group. They have grown exponentially, and we don't see anything that indicates that they're ramping down.
Tell us briefly what Jubilee Campaign is able to do there.
Well, Jubilee Campaign is a human rights group, but we don't just advocate. We actually provide relief to victims, and that's why a lot of these girls we've already assisted. Some of them are receiving counseling right now through our assistance. Some of them are actually enrolled in schools right now as we speak. It's a very small group, but we try to match advocacy with humanitarian assistance.
Very courageous work. Emmanuel Ogebe, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Well, the death of a young star player shocks Major League Baseball. St. Louis Cardinals outfielder Oscar Taveras was killed in a car crash in his native Dominican Republic yesterday. Police say he lost control of his vehicle and it went off the road. A second person also died in that wreck. Before this season, MLB.com and Baseball America ranked the 22-year-old as the #3 overall prospect in Major League Baseball. In fact, he hit a home run in the National League playoff just about 2 weeks ago. So this tragic news comes as the 2014 World Series wraps up Game 5. The San Francisco Giants now lead the Kansas City Royals 3-2. Giants pitcher Madison Bumgarner threw a 4-hitter to shut out the Royals 5-0 yesterday, so the series returns to Kansas City tomorrow night for Game 6. Well, running can be good for you. It can lower your blood pressure, lift your spirits, and burn calories for weight loss. But running may have a downside, dental problems. Catherine Zeltner tells us more.
A small study published in June in the Scandinavian Journal of Medicine and Science and Sports shows that physically active people, especially runners, have a higher risk of dental erosion. Researchers compared the diets of 35 triathletes to 35 people who did not exercise. They found that the harder they worked out, the less saliva they had, and the higher the pH balance was in that saliva. One of the reasons is what is referred to as runner's mouth. When you work out hard, you sweat and tend to breathe out of your mouth, both of which can dehydrate you and dry up the saliva. Saliva is crucial in oral health. It keeps your mouth clean and prevents bacterial buildup. Researchers had a few suggestions for those who work out vigorously. Drink plenty of water, since you need water to produce saliva. After you work out, chew a piece of sugar-free gum or pop a sugar-free candy to get the saliva glands working. Stay away from sugar. It encourages bacterial growth. Brush and floss your teeth regularly, especially after a run, to help rid your mouth of bacteria that the saliva would have flushed away. Catherine Seltner, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Catherine. And up next, we bring you a taste of the International Sacred Music Festival in Rome. Good evening on this Monday. Cuba is allowing construction of the country's first new Catholic church in 55 years. The building is being funded by donations from Catholics in Tampa, Florida. Experts say this is a sign of improving relations between the Vatican and Cuba's communist government. Those relations have been slowly improving since St. John Paul II's visit to that country in 1998. Well, a new way of growing apples could be starting to bear fruit in Italy. These rows of apples are growing from vines, not trees. Because of that, they're able to be bundled like a vineyard, not spread out like a traditional apple farm. The experimental growing has been going on for about 10 years, but this is the first time the benefits are being seen firsthand.
Having a flat and short tree is very beneficial for the grower and also for the environment, because everything we can do from the ground, it's easier and costs much less than on a tall tree.
Apple growing techniques haven't been shaken up since the 1960s when tall spindle trees gained roots in the industry. They replaced the familiar large round apple trees. And chocolate might be good for your memory. A new study published in Nature Neuroscience says there's a link between a natural compound in cocoa and reversing age-related memory loss. The flavanol compound helps strengthen blood flow and neural connections in the brain. The study says the amount of flavanol in a typical candy bar is tiny compared with the amount used in these tests. So eating a candy bar isn't going to immediately help with memory problems. The study was funded in part by a chocolate company. The International Sacred Music Festival brings a unique sound to Rome this week. An Aztec Mass was performed as a concert in Rome's Basilica of St. Ignatius of Loyola on Sunday. Joseph Gonzalez of Chula Vista, California, wrote Misa Azteca. His colleague, Dr. Teresa Russell, conducted. She says pre-Columbian Aztec percussion instruments give the Mass energy and color, a music interpretation unfamiliar to many.
It also incorporates several languages, so for an international crowd like you have here, it will inspire not only the familiar, but the unfamiliar.
The Roma Sinfodera Orchestra performed Aztec Mass with Continuo Arts Festival Chorus. Well, until tomorrow, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and watch again anytime you like on EWTN's YouTube page. For all of us at EWTN News Nightly, I'm Brian Patrick. Thank you for watching, and we leave you tonight with these images from Rome, this weekend's 100th anniversary celebration of the Schoenstatt movement. Good night and God.